My name is Renee Calloway. I am 33 years old, and 4 months ago, I sat in a hospital waiting room in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and listened to my brother say 5 words across my father's bed that I had, in some version or another, been hearing my entire life. "You were the backup plan," he said it quietly. Not cruelly, the way you might say something you know is a weapon. He said it the way people say things they have always believed to be simply true. The way you say the sky is gray in February or the roads are bad after midnight. A fact. An unexamined one. And my mother, sitting on the other side of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, did not correct him. My father, who was supposed to be resting, turned his face slightly toward the window, and I sat there for a moment with my purse in my lap and my checkbook inside it, and I thought about all the years I had spent being available for exactly this kind of moment. Ready. Capable. Quietly indispensable. The backup plan. And then I closed the checkbook, put it back in my purse, and made a decision that I have not once regretted. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if this story earns it. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I always want to know who's out there listening tonight. Now let me take you back to Clarksburg, West Virginia, to a house on Birchwood Lane where the porch light was always on, but the welcome inside was always conditional. Clarksburg, West Virginia. Population just under 16,000. The kind of town where the church potluck calendar and the high school football schedule are both considered essential public information, and where your last name follows you like a second shadow. I grew up on Birchwood Lane in a white house with green shutters that my father, Gerald Calloway, was always planning to repaint and never quite got around to. Gerald worked at the County Water Authority for 28 years. My mother, Sandra, ran the fabric section at the craft store downtown and spent her evenings either watching television or talking on the phone with her sister in Morgantown. Together, they made a modest, quiet life in a modest, quiet town. And together, without meaning to, without ever sitting down and deciding it consciously, they divided that life into two very unequal halves. My brother Derek was 2 years older than me. He had my father's height and my mother's easy laugh and the particular kind of confidence that comes from never once having had someone look at you and see a placeholder. Derek was the one my parents talked about at dinner, not in the loud, boastful way, just in the constant, low-frequency way that says, "This is who matters most in this house." Derek's grades were discussed. Derek's baseball stats were tracked. Derek's college options were researched with the same energy my mother brought to planning Christmas, which was to say a great deal of energy an entire Sunday afternoon's worth. Spread out over the kitchen table with printed spreadsheets and highlighted brochures. I want to be precise here because I think precision matters when you are talking about the kind of harm that happens slowly. Nobody hit me. Nobody told me I was stupid or worthless or unwanted. What happened was quieter and in some ways harder to name. I was simply allocated less attention, less investment, less of the assumption that my future was worth planning for. When Derek needed new cleats for baseball season, they appeared. When I needed new shoes for the school band recital, I was told to see what I could do with the ones I had. When Derek struggled in algebra, my father hired a tutor, $40 a week for the whole semester. When I struggled in chemistry, my mother told me that not everyone is a science person and that I should focus on what I was good at. I was 14. I was good at working hard and asking for very little. Those were not skills my parents had taught me intentionally. They were skills I had learned because the alternative was visible disappointment in a house that did not like visible disappointment. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job at the hardware store 2 evenings a week and all day Saturday. I opened a savings account at the credit union downtown and put 60% of every paycheck into it because I had already begun doing the math and I could see what it added up to. There was money in this house, not a lot, but some, and it was not going to find its way equally to both of Gerald and Sandra Calloway's children, so I was going to have to find another way to get where I was going, and that meant starting now. I graduated from Clarksburg High in the top 15% of my class. I applied to 9 colleges and received acceptance letters from 6. I got a partial scholarship to West Virginia University in Morgantown, a merit-based award that covered about 40% of tuition. I took out student loans for the rest. I packed my own boxes, drove myself to Morgantown in the used Honda I had bought with 3 years of hardware store savings, and moved into a dorm room so small the desk touched the bed. My parents came for exactly 1 hour on move-in day. My mother hugged me and said to call if I needed anything. My father carried 2 boxes and said the drive back would take about an hour and a half in traffic. Derek had been driven to Purdue 2 years earlier in a rented minivan with his entire family. My mother had cried. My father had helped him set up his television. They had stayed overnight in a hotel and taken Derek to dinner at a steakhouse before heading home. I drove back to Clarksburg for Thanksgiving of my freshman year and helped with the cooking, and did not mention the minivan or the steakhouse or the way my mother had cried. I had gotten good at not mentioning things. I graduated from WVU with a degree in healthcare administration. 4 years, 2 jobs, one campus emergency that cleaned out my savings account, and a determination so specific it sometimes kept me company on the long nights like a friend who never asked to leave. I moved to Pittsburgh afterward, entry-level position at a regional hospital system, managing outpatient billing. Not glamorous, essential. The kind of work that holds a system together from the inside while everyone else looks at the surgeons and the technology and the glass atrium of the new wing. I was good at it. Better than good. I had been managing limited resources and stretching what was available since I was 14 years old, and it turned out that skill translated very directly into healthcare administration. Within 2 years, I was a billing supervisor. Within 5, I was a department manager. By the time I was 31, I was director of revenue cycle operations for a mid-sized hospital network with 4 facilities. I had a 2-bedroom apartment in a Pittsburgh neighborhood I liked. I had health insurance and a retirement account, and a small but real emergency fund that I had rebuilt after the college crisis and never let fall below 4 months of expenses. I had built a life with the same precision and patience I had applied to everything since I was a teenager counting dollars at the credit union. I did not have a lot of family contact, not because of a dramatic falling out, not because of any particular incident in those years, just because the thread between us had always been thin and it had thinned further with distance and time and the gradual, undeniable reality that I called home more often than home called me. My mother called on birthdays and major holidays. My father rarely called at all, not out of hostility, just out of the habit of not calling the people who seemed to be managing fine on their own. Derek called almost never. We had the kind of sibling relationship that existed primarily in the background of other conversations, the "how's Derek doing?" that I answered with "fine" last I heard and then moved on. I knew the broad outline of Derek's adult life from these secondary reports. He had graduated from Purdue with a business degree. He had worked in sales for several years at a company in Indianapolis. He had married a woman named Trish. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, 7 and 4. He had started his own small business a few years back, something involving commercial cleaning contracts. It was doing okay, from what my mother said, some months better than others. She said this in the same careful tone she used for all Derek-related news, present tense, forward-looking, never dwelling on the harder parts. What I didn't know, because nobody told me, was that by the time I was 32, Derek's business was not doing okay. It was failing. Slowly, then quickly, the way these things go. He had taken out a second mortgage on his house to cover operating costs, 18 months before the hospital call. He was 3 months behind on commercial rent for his equipment storage. Trish had gone back to work full-time and they had pulled their son out of the private school, and this was all happening quietly in Indianapolis, while my mother told me on Sunday calls that Derek was just so busy. You know how he is always running. I know now, looking back, that my parents knew most of this. That Derek had been calling them, not every Sunday the way a child who is managing fine doesn't, but frequently, in the specific way of a person who needs something and is working up to asking for it. I know now that there had been conversations between Derek and my parents, that I was not part of conversations about money and options and what might be possible. Conversations that included my name in the way names get included when someone is considered a resource rather than a person. I did not know any of this when my father's heart attack happened. It was a Tuesday in October. My mother called at 6:47 in the morning. I was on my second cup of coffee and already reviewing a report before my 8 o'clock call. She said, "Renee, your father had a heart attack last night. I need you to come." Her voice was steady in the particular way of a person who has already used all their panic and is now just working through the logistics. I said I would be there by afternoon. I called my supervisor, rearranged my week, packed a bag, and drove 3.5 hours south to Clarksburg. My father was in the cardiac ICU at United Hospital Center. He had received treatment quickly enough that the damage was limited but real. He was conscious when I arrived, tired and gray in the way that people look when their body has done something violent to itself, but recognizably my father. My mother was sitting in the chair beside him. Derek was there too, which surprised me only briefly. Trish had stayed in Indianapolis with the kids. Derek looked older than I expected. The softness around his jaw, the way he sat with his elbows on his knees and his eyes slightly unfocused, these were things I had not seen in him before. He had always been the kind of person who occupied a room at full volume. For the first 2 days, we were just a family, or the nearest thing we managed to being one. We brought each other coffee. We talked to doctors. My mother asked the same 4 questions every time a nurse came in, and I started quietly writing down the answers on a notepad so she would have them. Derek sat with my father during the afternoon when my mother needed a break, and I sat with him in the evenings. Gerald Calloway, lying in a hospital bed with monitoring leads on his chest and an IV in his arm, was more talkative than he had been in years. He asked about my work. He asked what the hospital I managed was like. He seemed genuinely interested in a way that I was not used to from him, and I told myself it was the vulnerability of illness that does that to people, brings them to the surface of themselves. On the third day, the conversation about money started. It began with the doctors and the cardiologist's recommendation for a procedure, a specific intervention that would significantly reduce the risk of another cardiac event. My father's insurance, the plan he had maintained after retiring from the water authority, covered a portion of it. The gap was not catastrophic, but it was real. Somewhere in the range of $11,000 after the deductible and coinsurance. My mother mentioned it in the hallway outside the room, her voice low, her hands moving the way they did when she was anxious. She said she and Gerald had some savings, but not enough. She said it like she was explaining a problem she expected to be solved, not like she was asking anyone in particular to solve it. Derek said nothing. He looked at the floor. I said I could look at the numbers and see what made sense. My mother's face did something that I had seen it do my whole life, a specific relaxation, a particular settling of the shoulders. The expression of a person who has located the one in the room who will take care of the hard part. That evening, I drove to the house on Birchwood Lane and sat at the kitchen table with my mother and went through the financials. Her savings account had about $6,000. She had a small fixed income from my father's pension. There was no second savings. There was no emergency fund worth mentioning. She had, I noticed, recently made 2 Zelle transfers to Derek. The dates were 6 weeks apart. The amounts were, together, just over $4,000. She did not mention these. I did not ask about them that night. I went back to my apartment in Pittsburgh the following morning to work remotely for 2 days. I transferred $9,000 from my savings to my checking account. I did not make a decision yet. I wanted to wait until the procedure was scheduled and the final numbers were clear. It was on the 5th day, the afternoon before my father was transferred from the ICU to the cardiac step-down unit, that Derek said the thing he said. My father was sleeping. My mother had gone to the cafeteria with a neighbor who had come to visit. Derek and I were sitting on opposite sides of the bed in the particular quiet of a hospital room where the machines do most of the talking. We had barely spoken directly in 3 days, not out of hostility but out of the fact that we did not actually know each other particularly well. He was my brother in the legal and biological sense, and in the sense that we had shared a house for 18 years, but we were not people who knew each other. He started talking about the business. I had not asked, but he started talking, the way people do when they have been holding something for too long, and the silence of a hospital room finally provides the pressure to release it. He talked about the contracts that had not renewed, about the equipment loan, about the second mortgage, about Trish going back to work and what that meant for the kids' schedule. He talked for about 12 minutes without stopping, and I listened the way I listened to everything, quietly, taking it in, not performing a response but actually hearing it. And then he said, "Mom and Dad are going to need help with this bill, and after that probably with some ongoing things, and I can't right now." He paused. "You know they were always going to end up leaning on you for this stuff." He said it flatly, matter-of-factly. "You've always been the backup plan, Renee. That's just kind of how it worked out." There it was. 5 words from somewhere in the middle of a long, relieving breath, the kind you let out when you finally say the true thing that has been sitting in the room all along. You've always been the backup plan. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what that had cost, a description, a category. A function I had been assigned somewhere early in my life and never managed to resign from because I had always shown up when called, always made the hard part easier. always been available in the specific way of a person that nobody worries about because they have learned to count on her. My mother, who had come back from the cafeteria sometime in the last 3 minutes, was standing in the doorway. She had heard him. She looked at me, and then she looked at her hands, and she did not say, "Derek, that is not a fair thing to say to your sister." She did not say anything. My father turned his head very slowly toward the window. The room was very quiet. I reached into my purse. I felt the checkbook under my fingers. I had put it there intentionally that morning, had written out the amount in my head on the drive over, had been preparing to hand it to my mother after the discharge conversation with the billing department. $9,000. Clean, no ceremony. The way I had always done things, quietly, without making anyone feel that they owed me something. I held the checkbook for a moment. I thought about the minivan and the steakhouse and the Sunday calls I had made more often than received. I thought about the tutor for Derek and the chemistry class I had managed on my own. I thought about the $4,000 my mother had sent to Derek in the past 2 months that she had not mentioned. I thought about the word backup, about the word plan, about the way a person can spend 30 years being competent and invisible and walk into a hospital room and still be described, accurately and without cruelty, as something functional rather than someone loved. I put the checkbook back in my purse. I said, "I need some air." I stood up. I walked out of the room and down the hallway to the elevator and out through the main entrance into the cold October afternoon. I sat on a bench outside the hospital for about 20 minutes. I was not crying. I was doing what I had always done, which was thinking clearly and precisely about a situation and deciding what I was actually going to do. When I walked back in, I told my mother I needed to get back to Pittsburgh that afternoon for work. I told her I would be available by phone. I told her to call me if anything changed with Dad's condition. I hugged her. I nodded at Derek. I went home. I want to be honest with you about what happened in the weeks after that because I think the honest version is more useful than the version where I became someone decisive and clear overnight. I did not write a speech. I did not send a dramatic letter. I cried once in my car in the parking garage of my office building for about 4 minutes. And then I blew my nose and went upstairs and did my job because I am good at my job and my job needed me, and that too is a kind of steadiness. I called my mother every 2 days to check on my father's recovery. The procedure was scheduled and completed. It went well. Gerald Calloway was home by the end of October, moving slowly through the house on Birchwood Lane, the green shutters still needing paint, the porch light still on. My mother mentioned the hospital bill on our third call after the discharge. She said it carefully, in the circling way she approached things she was uncertain about. I said I had been thinking about how to help in a sustainable way and that I wanted to talk about it properly, not over the phone. She said, of course, whenever was good for me. I came home the first weekend in November. My father was in his chair in the living room, thinner, quieter, but present. Derek was not there. He had driven back to Indianapolis the week before. My mother had made the pot roast she made for occasions that required something specific and comforting, and we ate together, the three of us, and for a while it was just a family dinner, close to ordinary. After dinner I helped clear the table and we sat back down and I told them what I had decided. I said, "I love you both and I want to help with Dad's medical situation, and I am going to help. But I need to be honest about something first." I said I had heard what Derek said in the hospital room. I said I had heard the part about the backup plan. I said I needed them to understand something that I should have said 20 years ago, which was this: I am not a backup plan. I am your daughter. And those two things are not the same. My father looked at me. He had the expression of a man who knows that something he let happen for a long time has finally required him to look at it directly. It was not a comfortable expression. It was an honest one. My mother said, "Renee, Derek didn't mean it the way it sounded." I said, "I know he didn't. I know he was saying it like it was just a fact, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. It is a fact. It has been a fact for a long time, and I'm telling you now that I would like it to be less of a fact going forward, because I don't want to be a resource that this family draws on when the primary options run out. I want to be a person this family knows." The room was very quiet in the way the house on Birchwood Lane had always been quiet. The particular silence of a house where certain things were not said and everyone had learned to fill the space with other sounds. My father said, "You're right," and then, after a moment, he said it again. "You're right, Renee. I should have done better." I sat with that for a moment. It was the first sentence he had ever said to me that did not, in one form or another, assume I was managing fine. My mother did not say much. Not that evening. But she also did not defend the pattern the way she might have years ago. She looked at the table and she looked at her hands, and eventually she said, "I didn't know you felt this way." I said, "Mom, I was always fine. That was the problem." Here is what I decided to do, and I want to be specific because I think the specific part matters. I am not someone who believes that love means unlimited access to my resources. I am also not someone who believes that because a family has failed you, the right answer is always to cut every thread. What I believe, what I have come to believe after 33 years of being the person who figured things out on her own, is that relationships need terms. Not contracts, not legal documents, but a clear understanding of what is being offered and what is not. I told my parents that I would contribute $5,000 toward the hospital bill, not nine, not the full amount. 5. The other portion was going to need to come from their savings and from a conversation with Derek about what he could manage, even if it was not much right now. I said I was willing to set up a small monthly transfer to help with ongoing expenses while my father recovered, but that I needed it to be a mutual agreement with clear amounts. Not an open tap that I left running because nobody asked me to turn it off. I also told them that I wanted to start talking more. Not the Sunday call where everything was fine and Derek's news arrived and mine was assumed. Really talking. I said I would call on Wednesdays as well. I said I wanted them to call me when something was happening, not after it had resolved itself one way or another. I said this not to make a point, but because I actually wanted it. I had spent 30 years being allocated less, and I had built a life anyway. A good one. But there was still this specific thing I had never managed to build, which was a family that saw me. And I was not entirely willing to give up on it. My mother nodded. My father said, "We'll do better." He said it like a man who meant it, which was the most I could ask for. I called Derek the following Monday evening. He answered after 4 rings. He had the careful voice of a man who knows a difficult call is coming and has been waiting for it. I told him I was not calling to be angry. I was calling because he was my brother, and because what he had said in that hospital room was something I needed him to understand. I said the backup plan line back to him exactly. I said, "You said it like it was just a description, like it was just the way things are. And I need you to know that the way things are is something people choose, even if they choose it by not choosing anything. Every time you didn't call. Every time you let me be the one who handled things. Every time you assumed I would be fine. That was a choice. It just never felt like one because I was always fine." Derek was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know." His voice had something in it I had not heard before, something younger than the voice he usually used. He said, "I've been a pretty bad brother." I said, "Not bad, absent. There's a difference." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't totally know how to fix it." I said, "I don't either. But we could try and find out." He said he thought that was fair. It is not a resolution. I want to be clear about that. Derek's business is still struggling. My parents are still on a fixed income in a house with green shutters that need painting. I am still, in many practical senses, the person in this family who has the most financial stability. The structural facts have not changed overnight because of one honest conversation. But the story about the facts is starting to change. And that is different from nothing. My father called me last week. Not because something was wrong, not because my mother had told him to. He called on a Tuesday afternoon and asked how things were going at work, and then he told me about the bird feeder he had put up in the backyard during his recovery and how there was a cardinal that came every morning. He talked for about 15 minutes. Before he hung up, he said, "I'm proud of you, Renee. You've always figured things out on your own, and I should have made that harder for you, not easier." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "I'm going to do better." I said, "I know that too. I don't know what my mother tells the women at her church about my visit. I don't know what she tells Derek on their calls. I don't know if the story in her head has changed or if it has just acquired a new chapter. I have made peace with not knowing. What I know is that I sat in a hospital waiting room with a checkbook in my purse, and I heard my brother describe me with perfect accuracy and complete blindness at the same time, and I made a choice. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that ends everything or punishes someone or makes a statement loud enough to echo. Just the quiet kind. The kind that says, "I see what this is, and I am no longer willing to be this, and here is what I am willing to be instead." That is the only kind of choice that has ever held anything together in my life. The precise kind. The honest kind. The one where you finally stop negotiating the terms of your own invisibility and just say, plainly and without apology, that you are here, that you have always been here, that you would like, for once, to be seen as something more than the plan that nobody needed until they needed it. My father's cardinal comes every morning. He texts me a photo sometimes, just the bird on the feeder, red against the gray November yard. No message, just the photo. I look at it every time. It is the most contact we have had in 30 years. It is small and imperfect and 33 years overdue. It is also real. And real, at this point in my life, is the thing I want most. My name is Renee Calloway. I am the Director of Revenue Cycle Operations at a hospital network in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am the woman who saved 60% of every hardware store paycheck when she was 16. I am the woman who drove herself to college in a used Honda and cried in a parking garage once 4 months ago and went upstairs and did her job and did it well. I am the woman who sat in a hospital room with a checkbook she had already filled out and put it back in her purse and walked outside into the cold air and decided, for the first time in her life, not to be the backup plan. If you have made it this far, I want to ask you something. I want you to think about the role you play in your family, not the official role, the unofficial one, the one nobody assigned out loud but everybody assumed. Are you the strong one, the capable one, the one who always figures it out? The one they call last because they know you'll be fine, and also the one they call last because they know you'll show up? If you are, I want you to hear this. Being capable is not the same as being a resource. You are a person. You are allowed to be seen as one. You do not have to close your checkbook dramatically or give a speech or send a letter. You just have to stop negotiating the terms of your own invisibility. Say the sentence. Whatever your sentence is, say it plainly. Say it once. And then see what happens. That's my story. If it sat with you, drop a comment. Tell me your city and your local time. Tell me if you've ever been the backup plan. Tell me what you did about it or what you wish you had. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, I've left a few in the description. Come back next week. I'll be here.